Chris Pitman is here to share with us today the 3-point software estimation sponsored by Ian. Chris, you have your own slides to drive today?
Yes, I do. I'll throw them up right now.
We'll stop sharing.
This is Chris. You all know Chris. Chris, take it away.
Hey, everyone. So this is a deck that's existed for a long time, and I have not timed it, so I'm going to try to get through this deck as quickly as possible so we can get into some of the updates that we've made to the calculator, the tooling that you can use to support project estimation. Just, quick, why are we even talking about this? Obviously, we work in an industry where estimating the size and effort of software projects is incredibly important. Not only for us as a business, because if we underestimate projects, we put that client relationship at risk. If we overestimate projects, we damage our ability to actually make a sale, but also for the actual culture of our organization, right? A under scoped project is going to cause people to hate their life, and we don't want to do that. So we have to do everything we can to try to get reasonable software project estimates, not just kind of sticking our thumb in our mouth and sticking up in the air and going, 3 months sounds good. So real quick, all of my background around software estimation comes from having read this book, 10, 12 years ago now. It's called Software Estimation, Demystifying the Black Art. It's by Steve McConnell, also known for the book Code Complete. It's a very short book. It's a great read. There's a lot of different ways to do software estimation. In my opinion, many of them are difficult to apply in consulting as opposed to in-house development. So I have selected the subset of methods that I thought worked best given the context of our business, and that's what I'm going to kind of walk through. So just a couple, things to think about when we talk about software estimation. So Fred Brooks in the Mythical Man Month, so this has been a problem for a long time, said, false scheduling to match a patron's desired date is more difficult in our discipline than elsewhere in engineering because it is very difficult to make a vigorous, plausible, job-risking defense of an estimate that is derived by no quantitative method, supported by little data, and brought about by the hunches of developers. And this is the classic, if I have nothing to back up my estimate other than my belief that it is a 6-week project, and the client or account team says, well, how about 5 weeks? It's really hard to actually push back against that because all I've got is, no, I think 6 weeks. And then the other way of taking that is Tom DeMarco's quote here: the common definition of estimate is an estimate is the most optimistic prediction that has a non-zero probability of coming true. Accepting this definition leads irrevocably toward a method called what's the earliest date by which you can't prove you won't be finished estimating. So again, the common practice around project estimation, they push us to be optimistic. They push us towards the date that is theoretically possible, but incredibly unlikely, which is setting us up for failure, especially given our business. And I really should update this at some point, but it hasn't changed. So the Chaos Report is a yearly report done about the state of software engineering. And in 2015, only 29% of software projects were delivered on time, on budget, and with a satisfactory result. 52% were challenged, which means that it was on one of those axes, was either not on time, not on budget, or did not have a satisfactory result. And 19% just outright failed. So as an industry, we're not great at this. So just real quick, let's talk about what an estimate actually is. So, or in this case, what is not an estimate? So when you hear someone say we need to complete a migration by the end of the year, that's not an estimate, that's a target. I know that sounds obvious, but it's good to have different words for these things. The target is an objective result towards which our effort is directed, but it's not an estimate. On the same line, we will complete the migration by the end of the year. Also not an estimate. That's a commitment. It's a declaration that we're going to get something done. So what is an estimate? Based on our analysis, the complete migration will take a team of 4 consultants 4.5 months. So an estimate needs to be an approximate calculation with a value, number, quantity, or extent of something. So because it's a calculation, it needs to be unbiased. When we say biased here, we're talking about things like commitments and targets. We don't want the fact that, hey, the client needs to get this done by the end of the year to bias the estimation process towards trying to say, well, maybe if we just shorten everything a little bit, we can get it to fit by the end of the year, because we want to make sure that we're estimating the actual effort, not trying to fit inside an envelope. Analytical. So the approach we're going to take is based off of, it's a statistical approach. So it's an analytical approach, and it predicts the cost or duration of a project. There are other cases where I've used this estimate procedure in consulting. They don't come up every day, but sometimes we have situations where we need to estimate. We need to estimate things like the amount of hardware that we're going to need for a system when it takes 6 months to provision hardware and the system hasn't even been written yet. And that's always challenging. We can use these kinds of techniques in situations like that as well. But really the main focus here is on time and effort, because that's what we have to do during sales cycles. So because it's analytical, estimates cannot be negotiated down. There's no reasonable way to negotiate down an estimate. Now, that being said, we do need to be able to negotiate with clients, but what we negotiate around is not the estimate. So if for some reason our estimate doesn't line up with our commitments, doesn't line up with our targets, we have to negotiate scope. We have to negotiate resourcing. And the tooling that we're going to go over helps you line up that conversation. It makes it so that people don't want to negotiate the estimates because the math's too complex and they don't get it anyways. And it's really, really easy to negotiate the scope. And also, the other thing this is going to help us do is identify parts of our project that really have lots of variability. There's lots of risk. When we say risk here, we're generally meaning we don't know how long it's going to take. Maybe there's external dependencies. Maybe there's a lot unknown about what we need to do there. And by identifying these things, we might instead decide to take a step back and maybe do like a POC project or something like that first in order to provide a little bit more clarity around the actual scope. Other important thing about an estimate. So often when people give estimates, they'll say, well, it'll be 20 days. By definition, 20 days, that actual number, it's wrong, right? It might be 19 and a half days. It might be 21 days. It might be 40 days. So every estimate, whether stated or not, has some confidence interval attached to it. We want to make that confidence interval explicit. We want to be able to see what the range of possibilities we think are reasonable are, because it's possible that based on our estimate, it's 20 days plus minus 1 day, which is like, okay, that's almost nothing. But it could be 20 days plus minus 10 days, in which case a 10-day project and a 30-day project are really different from each other. And I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but this is, again, coming from Steve McConnell's book. And really, it's this concept that we need to keep in mind, which is there's a limit to how confident we can be in a very narrow range estimate at the point in the project we are always doing our SOWs in, right? So as the project moves on, if we put the effort into it, we can narrow down the range of possibilities for how long a project will take. But to do that, we have to start defining detailed requirements, detailed designs, things that often we don't even necessarily do anymore. But usually when we're doing an SOW, the requirements aren't complete. Very often the SOW is at that initial concept line. It might be at that line for what they call an approved product definition. But wherever it is, the real range of possibilities is massive. And that's just the reality of our business. So we have to keep that in mind while estimating, that we need to basically factor in that buffer in an analytical way, not the classic like double your developer's estimates way, to take into account the range of possibilities. Okay, so things we can do to become better estimators. 1, don't ever give off-the-cuff estimates. If someone asks you how long something will take, make sure that you sit down and take an analytical approach for coming up with a number. Remember that precision doesn't equal accuracy. So precision in this case means providing an estimate with lots of degrees of, 42.25 days. You don't know it's going to take 42.25 days. We don't have that level of accuracy in our actual process. So make sure when you represent an estimate that you provide it in units that get across the actual level of confidence we have. So in this case, that might be 40 days, 45 days. It might be actually, in this case, I'd probably round to weeks and say that that's, what is that? 8 weeks, 9 weeks, because that's getting across the more close to the unit I actually have confidence in. Now, this is one of the areas that's very challenging for us in consulting, but as often as possible, have the people who are going to do the work do the estimates. This is more possible when we're talking about work that is a continuation of ongoing work than like initial work at a client. But when possible, when we know who's going to do it, one, they know the environment of that client better than anyone else. They know the kinds of drag or the kinds of speed that the client moves at. But also the capabilities of individual team members is another very large variability point, and they know their own capabilities better than anyone else. Remember, no one works 40 hours a week. This is something that our updated spreadsheet helps you take into account. But there's all kinds of overhead, meetings. They have meetings, PTO, people being sick, other projects, training. You got to take into account that there's overhead time. And last but not least, don't reduce developer estimates. Developers are developers because they're optimistic people. If they were pessimists, they would go do something else. So don't reduce their estimates. So going back to this idea of being unbiased, this is really challenging. The easiest way to do this is to make sure that the people who are estimating your project haven't been told what the target is. But if they have been told what the target is, you really need to consciously try to not think about those targets. There's lots of ways that this can leak in. In practice, if you tell someone that if you set, it doesn't even have to be a target. If you just mention that you think a project is 3 months long, you've already started setting a bias for them that they're thinking in terms of months. If you didn't say that, it's possible that they go back and do the estimation procedure and realize that they're really talking about 2 weeks of work, or that you're talking about 1 year of work. And by biasing them, you're really messing that up. Avoid wishful thinking. If you've ever heard anyone say, this time it's going to be better because either A, we've learned, B, we have a new technology, this new piece of automation is going to make everything better. I never estimate based off of that. I estimate off of our past performance, and then I wait to see proof that our new procedure, our new tool is actually going to make things better. And then if I see that it's made things better, then I'll start incorporating that into my estimates going forward. Be very prescriptive about what you're estimating. What does each of your tasks include? Are you including the testing, defect resolution, integration testing, or are you going to pull those out into a separate task that you're going to estimate separately? You want to make sure that you're covering these things somewhere, and you want to make sure that the people doing the estimates aren't assuming like, if I'm implementing a CRUD service, that they're not just thinking of the time to write the first version of the code, that they're thinking of unit testing, the time to do integration testing, if there's any UAT or similar kind of testing, if they have to resolve defects, that time all needs to be accounted for somewhere. So one good way of doing this is when you are doing an estimate with a team is to start off with a checklist. Come up with a list that everyone agrees of what's going to be in their estimates, because you also need to be consistent. If one person's going to include the unit testing time in each task, everyone needs to include the unit testing time in each task. Okay. I know I'm blowing through this, so just real quick, does anyone have any questions? I saw one pair of thumbs, therefore we're great. If at any point people do have questions, just hit the hand up and I'll hear the ding and I'll stop. Okay, let me send this link to everyone so that you can pull it up yourself.
I'll ask a question.
What's up, Ian?
I've got to get this SOW out by the end of the day, and the TSM says I need to ship it by 4. I don't have time to do your damn spreadsheet that takes 5 hours. So I should just make it up, right?
I mean, you obviously know what answer you want there. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, I actually don't run into that too often. I'm curious how much of that is an experience thing where, I mean, TSMs hopefully learn that misscoped projects cause them as much risk as anyone else.
How long do you, if it's, I'll ask a more serious question. How long do you find it typically takes to go through the exercise?
Yeah, so it varies a lot. And what I've learned to do is to tailor the level of detail that I do in this exercise based off of the size and complexity and the amount of time I have to do an estimate. So what I mean by that is you can do this process in half an hour to an hour, or you can do it over a day or two, depending on the level of detail that you go into the estimate. And basically the way it works is the more detail you put into this, the more accurate you can be, the tighter a timeline you can provide. But not every project needs a tight timeline. Lots of projects can go with a more broad variety of possibilities. Hey, Abner, what's up?
Hey, Chris. Just a question on where are you? Like, I'm a new architect. It's like, hey, you're an architect, and then go do the job, but no places where like, oh, look at this, go read this land, go learn this, and all that other stuff for new architects onboarding. So currently, I don't see an onboarding process, and this would be great to have all this information for new architects.
Yeah, so there has been an ongoing project that we really need to kick into another gear to get pre-sales scoping enablement available for all of North America. We've got the slides put together. It includes this content or a version of this content. And the next step is to actually get those all recorded and get them into a learning path. So definitely, Abner, yeah, we need to make this more available. Historically, it's just been whenever Ian or Mike invites me to go talk to NAPS about it. That's
Thank you.
okay. So as people are pulling up the spreadsheet, I'm actually going to go ahead and also share the spreadsheet. So this is the template that you can copy whenever you're going to be doing this process. And this is a significantly updated template from the original version to help with many of the conversations that we frequently need to have. So first step here are instructions, which will hopefully help guide you through the process when you don't remember everything that we're talking about right here. But in general, you're going to move through these tabs from left to right. So first up are task estimates. On the task estimates tab, you're going to break down the work that you're doing on the project into a set of tasks. And this is where you have that control over granularity I was talking about before. For this method to work well, you need to have at least 10 things on here. So that's the lower limit. There is no upper limit. The more you break things down, the more accurate you can get, as long as you actually have knowledge about the project that allows you to break it down to that level, right? You can't get more granular than you actually know about the project. Yeah, so step one, right? Break down the test. The second step is something called a 3-point estimate.
I just want to make a quick tactical recommendation. If you happen to be writing your SOW document before you do the task estimation, like you're working in a Google Doc, do single level bullets because it is so much easier to copy paste. You can literally copy a single level bullet list from a Google Doc and paste it into the sheet. And then if you update the tasks, because you figure if you use better language, you can tighten up the scope, you can then copy those right back into your single level bullets. So whenever you find yourself doing nested bullets, switch to using separate headers in your SOW. So every task is just a single level bullet. It makes it so much easier to go back and forth between these two tools. Like, you don't have to, but I've spent hours just making my life a lot easier by doing that.
That's a great suggestion. I have not been doing that, and I've just been suffering with bullets. So that's
Yeah, if it's single level bullets in the Google Doc, you can just copy the bullets and do a Control V into the sheet, and it puts it on separate columns. And then when you copy the sheet back in and do a paste not special, it'll put it back into bullets. It's
awesome.
It's very easy. But as soon as you have sub bullets, it's then hard to tell. Well, am I estimating the parent bullet or am I estimating the sub bullet? And it becomes this whole big question. So like forcing yourself to do single level bullets in your SOW, then if you're going that direction first, makes life a lot easier. I've also worked to make sure all of our canned SOWs stick to single level bullets for that reason.
Cool. Okay, so you're going to break things down. Here, just to go back here. So you're going to break things down. You're looking for any hidden or missing work that you haven't been thinking of. You want to make sure you're covering everything. And again, yeah, the more fine-grained and accurate the breakdown is, the more accurate your estimate will finally be. You need to shoot for at least 10. And just another point of make sure that the tasks really capture the essential complexity of the project. Sometimes when people are starting with task lists in general, they will kind of create what I call like a task list that might as well be for any project, right? I start the project, I do some work, I do testing. And with that kind of task list, it's difficult for the person reading to actually understand the essential complexity of the work that's being done. So make sure that your tasks get across. What is the actual complexity of this project versus every other project? And then what we're going to do for each line item is something called a 3-point estimate. So what that means is you're going to estimate not just a single number, because again, the single number is wrong. By definition, it's always going to be more or less time than that because a single number is very specific. So instead, I ask people to estimate the best case. What's the earliest time that this could conceivably take? What's the worst case? Now, obviously, there's a long tail on things, but when things go wrong, or when this isn't exactly what we thought it is, or people aren't available, what's the worst case scenario for this item? And then between those two, what do I think is most likely? And that forms a triangle of a triangular probability distribution of the possible outcomes that we might have. And some things that you can do with this is you can start some conversations about risks for each task, right? If you have a task with like a best case and a worst case that are really far away from each other, then that's you identifying there's risk in this line item. Well, why is there risk in this line item? Is that risk that we can mitigate in some way? Maybe we make an assumption that allows us to have tighter bounds on that risk. Maybe we can do something earlier on in the project to help mitigate that risk. But we can identify that risk numerically. Okay, so back in the spreadsheet. So we've got our tasks and we've got our 3-point estimates. Best case, worst case, most likely. You pick the units up at the top. So right now it's set to days and I'll keep it there for now. And then one other thing that we've added in here is you can you can put in a label for the track of the task. The way to think of tracks, don't overuse this. This is when you have tasks that are going to be done by completely different teams. You've got like a multi-work stream project, a multi-team project. Maybe you have a consultant dedicated to a certain part of the work. You can use the track to separately label and tag that time so that we can make sure that we're accounting for the number of hours that person's going to need on the project and not assuming that the OpenShift app dev consultant is going to do the OpenShift infrastructure architect work. We'll come back to one other thing on here, but let's keep moving for now. So risks have basically the same structure. So here you're outlining what risks could affect the schedule of this project. And the one thing that's additional here is you say, well, what's the actual chance I think that this risk has of happening? If it's 100%, it's not a risk anymore. It's a task. So just go ahead and put it on the task list. But, so in this case, development environments may not be ready in time for the project based off of our experience with this client or my experience overall with other clients. I expect there's a 25% chance that this will happen. If it does happen, the best case is that one day later they'll fix it. The worst case is it'll take 2 weeks for them to fix it. Most likely, it's going to take most of a week for them to get environments together if they're not ready on time. Again, this is a point that you can then use for future conversation. If this is a significant impact on the overall schedule and level of effort, you can go back and say, hey, we're accounting for development environments not being ready on time. What can you do to assure us that they will be ready on time so that I can remove this from my estimate? Out of scope, no fancy math here. This is just a place to put down anything that's out of scope. In general, when I have my team using this spreadsheet, they do this before the task list. So this is then something that they can use to carry it over into the task list when they're doing that. Okay, next up, for anyone who has any experience with GFAs, this is going to look very familiar. This is called the Project Classification Matrix. It's a tool that the PMO put together to rate the complexity level of a project. They're all relatively simple questions with drop downs that you can use to say what kind of situation we're working with at that client. You go through, you answer all the questions, and that's going to help us know how many PM hours we need and also what level of project manager we need on the project. Okay. Last tab. We get to the team modeling tab. So what's going to happen on this tab is, okay, first I should scroll to the top. First up, you need to say, what level of confidence do we need that we're going to be on time and on budget? Usually when you ask people to go, well, 100%, well, that's impossible. 100% never happens. We can never have perfect confidence. So instead you have to pick some confidence number. So I've got a couple options in here. So, 50%, if you just, coin flip chance to get it done on time. I generally go with 90% for most time and materials. If I'm dealing with fixed price, I might go with 95 or 99%. You'll see it gives you a little note just to let you know, like, hey, here's the recommendation. 99% is probably a fixed price project. 90% is pretty good for time and materials. Then how many productive hours in a week? So if you have any knowledge of the client, you might be able to provide a better number for this. As a standard, I've put in 32 hours. So that means 8 hours of the week. I should assume anyone on the project is involved in overhead activities like meetings or other things like that. Then extra time per person for onboarding. How long will it take to onboard each person who joins the project? Again, helps to have more knowledge of the client. You can put in anything that makes sense. Then there's a drop down for the type of the project. So is it a long-term DEE? Is it a standard project or a multi-work stream project? And is the project manager actually going to be a scrum master? And then you get down here, and what we ask at this point is that you start basically saying, how many people do I want to be dedicated each track of this project? So in this case, in the estimates, because I had an app and infra set of tasks, it just updates based off of whatever you put in the track in the earlier tabs. It's going to break out that time here. And what you're going to say is, okay, for app, I can have associate consultants through principal architects. How many people am I going to have in each one of those roles? So just, for fun, what if I had 2 senior consultants here? So with 2 senior consultants, there's 18 days of senior consultant time total. With the quarter of an architect, there's 2.25 days of architect time. And put all together, the calendar time for this track would be 9 days. So that's just the literal, when I started, it'll take 9 days after that to accomplish that track. And then each track is computed separately. So infra over here has 1 consultant, 1 senior consultant, and a quarter of an architect. And it's going to take 42 days. So this can inform like, okay, well, maybe these don't start at the same time. Or maybe it makes no sense to make this take 9 days. Maybe 14 days is better. It's not going to make the project any faster anyways. Or maybe I need to come over here and say, maybe I need a 50% architect to bring that down to 38 days. So you can start playing around with what team structure makes sense. And you obviously need to be thinking about how parallelizable is the work in this track, because you can't go above that. But I'd also really encourage you to think about ways that you can make the work actually work in a team structure. Very often I see that we're writing SOWs where we kind of say, I need one person who knows OpenShift app dev and one person who knows OpenShift infra, when it would be better for us as a business to identify opportunities for multiple people, because we need to provide opportunities for our consultants and associate consultants to upskill. So that's what you're doing here. Again, what team structure makes sense? This gives you the calendar time. And the bottom left here, it gives you the SKUs to actually provide to the TSM based off of that. So how much project manager time, and for each of the roles, how much time for each of those. So you can use that to provide those recommendations. Now, one other thing I want to make sure we hit here. So one of the other features we added is support for negotiation. As I mentioned before, we don't negotiate on estimates, but we need to be able to negotiate on scope and team structure. So negotiate on team structure, you come to this tab and you can say, okay, well, what if we had an extra consultant? What would that do to our overall timeline? What would that do to our cost? The other thing that you can do is, if we go back to the task estimates, you'll see this initial column with a checklist labeled exclude. And what that lets you do is actually toggle individual tasks in and out of an estimate, so that you can say, okay, well, what if this wasn't in scope? What if that wasn't in scope? And whenever you do that, it flows all the way through to team modeling, so that you can just kind of play through with either your TSM or even your client around what different scopes would look like and what their impact would be on the overall schedule. And when you do that, it's taking into account the entire statistical model. So you're not accidentally shooting yourself in the foot where you take out something where you said, well, most likely case is 2 weeks, but turns out the math doesn't work quite that way. So want to support that negotiation, make it really easy to make that kind of a conversation.
I'd say the other type of negotiation, at least I've been willing to play with, is, so like if I go to my task list and I see that one of them had like a best case of 2 hours and a worst case of 80 hours, most likely of 20, that's ripe for what can we put in the out of scope or the prerequisites that allows me to tighten up the worst case. Like, so if I add this to my prerequisites, does that mean I can reduce my worst case? Or saying, well, what if I change the language of this task to be more inclusive or less inclusive, typically less inclusive? So like to Chris's point, you're not allowed to negotiate on the estimate of the existing task. But if you change the language, or you change the prerequisites, or you change the out of scope, then you can mess with the time estimates on the tasks. And I have certainly done that. But you have to be careful, right? Again, like I always tell people, if you don't change the task language, and you don't change the out of scope, and you don't change the prerequisites, then you're not allowed to change the numbers you initially put in for best, worst, and most likely case. That's cheating.
The other one that I do fairly often is some of those tasks are ones that are also good targets for time boxing, where if we can make that explicit in the task list, things like performance testing and performance tuning, they could go on forever. So we could potentially actually put in like 2 weeks. We're going to spend we're going to spend up to 2 weeks on performance tuning.
Yeah.
That lets you put a very strong estimate on that time.
And then like another thing, like I've run into like people questioning, like if you put on the SOW, like I'm going to run a 4-hour workshop on operators, then you can put 444 for the estimate, right? If you're, that's going to be a time box that way. So like it's not out of the realm of allowed.
Okay. That's all I got. Anyone have any questions? To say we've been using variations of this approach for a decade now. It's worked fairly well for me in the past.
Chris, what would you say, like, is this a required part of your process for NA scoping, or is it still done only when people want to?
So in the East team, we've essentially got one decision point. If it's a standard solution and offering, they don't need to do this.
Mhm.
If it's not a standard solution offering, they need to do this. And what we've done is we've automated the generation of this template into our pre-sales drive structure. So it goes right out there in front of everyone as a part of the process.
Maybe we need to steal some of that automation, because I think we want to get to the same place. And
Yeah,
to
I think I was
the
was curious
conversation.
about
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Ian. I was curious about the same thing as Carolyn, is, you know, where to cheat, where to go look for templates and parts and pieces that are already completed, so we don't necessarily have to generate from scratch each time.
Yeah, so right now this is really structured most easily for things that are like truly custom. I mean, there's no actual plan to do this right now, but I've had this thought that it would be really nice to go back to even like our standard solutions and offerings. If we had a spreadsheet like this for a standard solution offering, so that when we went to make modifications to that offering, if it's removing things, it becomes really easy. Okay, just exclude them. Okay, great. How does that affect my estimate? But also, when I'm adding things, it makes it so that there's a little bit more structure than just like, I think that adds 2 weeks of time. Like,
Yeah, and we actually do have it for some of them, especially in the cache, because as of the sprints last year, I forced the team to go through this exercise for any new module. So they do exist, but like we haven't really publicized them or made sure they were clean for reuse. So if you are looking for it, I hate to say this, but you can ping me and I might have one. And it sounds like Carolyn raised her hand after shutdown, helping track those all down and start getting them linked and cleaned up to really start populating that library and putting them next to the SOW lists.
And then in the same vein, and I realize this is for a minority and you're already speaking to a minority being NAPS, but the exact same vein you just mentioned, Chris, you take a standard solution offering and then you put just a slight twist on it, such as disconnected, FIPS enabled, any of these things. And I'm wondering if you had any good suggestions or hints on that kind of scoping.
yeah, I mean, that's what we're just talking about. Is, I mean, I would love to have a world where we had like one relatively consolidated like CAG 3-point estimate spreadsheet where maybe disconnected by default was excluded, and you could just go in there and go click turn them all on and see where that drives things. It's say you certainly can use this spreadsheet to estimate just the things that you're adding. It's just not necessarily always going to work out exactly the way you'd want, because it's going to essentially assume that small project is a project all unto its own. So it's going to add onboarding time. It's going to have the project manager kickoff time, the project manager wrap up time. So it's not perfect for that scenario right now.
Cool. Thanks.
And anyone who sat in on any of our PPRs recently, you might have noticed that it's getting harder and harder to get past PPR with a custom scope where you didn't do this. Well, we haven't made it a requirement yet. You can probably sense the writing on the wall.
So I love this. Thank you, Chris. I was really kind of hoping in the beginning you were going to make us clone this and have everybody run through this exercise, but I know we don't have time for that. I would suggest that those of us who might be interested in this, I would be more than willing to spend some time actually doing a mock exercise to get more experience on this, because this is awesome.
Well, we can double dip and we can run through exercises scoping the canned offerings.
There we go.
And it'll be a little cheaty because you could verify what the scope offerings are currently scoped at a little bit, but and then we get something usable out of it too. And if people really want to do that, I'm happy to run those sessions come the new year. So, but I'm going to leave it to the folks like you, Jeff and Carolyn, if you really want to do that, to ping me in the new year, if you really want to put that together.
Yeah, it seems like we got enough people in the chat that you might as well schedule it.
I'll let someone else take the onus for sorting that in the new year.
Thank you, Abner. Appreciate you for volunteering.
I'm volunteering to be part of the class.
I don't think that's a feature of Google Meet. Can you raise someone else's hand?
Thank you so much, Chris, for doing this refresher. And I think Mike did volunteer to cut this portion out of our recording. So maybe you can. I know you get asked for this a lot. Maybe you can just start sharing the recording.
Well, like I mentioned when Abner asked, we're trying to get all this content out there. I've been working with Carrie and Petrovelli on it for the last couple months, so we just need to record the entire thing at this point.